Je déclare ouverte cette séance.
I call this meeting to order and welcome to meeting number 41 of the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. I'll start with a couple of reminders. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Just so you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Of course, screenshots or taking of photos of your screen is not permitted.
To our witnesses who are appearing here today, you can toggle between English and French. I know we have some folks on the screen that I'll introduce momentarily, but even those in the room, there is interpretation in the two languages. I'd ask that when you are speaking, that you speak slowly and clearly, and when you're not speaking, your microphone should be on mute. And finally, a reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. So, in accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I'm informing the committee that the following witnesses have not completed the required connection test, and that's Taras Kacha, and I know that we're working to try to see whether or not the Deputy Minister is able to join, but there has been an inability to make sure that that test did happen. We do have some substitutions today, so I'll welcome Ms. Collins on behalf of Mr. McGregor. Welcome to the committee, and for Monsieur Parent, Monsieur Simon-Pierre Savard Tremblay. Bienvenue à la committee.
Welcome to the committee. Thank you very much for your warm welcome.
The other thing, just quickly before we get at it, is, oh my God, Mr. Nader, you weren't on my list because I think you were maybe not a last minute, but you were here on behalf of Mr. Steinley. Great to see you again. We had you last week, so you're becoming a regular. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, November 21st, 2022, the committee will resume its study of the Ukraine goods remission order. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for the first 1 hour panel. So joining us, certainly what was scheduled. We'll see if whether or not Taras Kacha, the Deputy Minister of Economy Trade, representative of Ukraine, can join. The invitation was sent to the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. We have Ihor Miashelskin, I hope I'm getting that right, Executive Director and the Chief Executive Officer, and Orest Zadalski, Senior Policy Advisor. You guys are joining us on the screen. Thank you and welcome. From Chicken Farmers of Canada, we have Tim Klopmaker, who is the Chair. Welcome. Michael Laliberte, the Executive Director, and Yves Ruel, the Associate Executive Director. And I would be remiss without mentioning Nick DeGraff. He's one of my constituents, and I wanted to make sure you're on the record, Mr. DeGraff. So you'll be forever in the Hansard, so to speak, of the House of Commons. Thank you for the work that you do in King's Hands. We're going to allow up to 5 minutes for opening remarks from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and from Chicken Farmers of Canada, and if Deputy Minister can join us. So I'm going to start. Mr. Klopmaker, over to you for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Klopmaker, and I am Chair of Chicken Farmers of Canada. I operate my chicken farm in Norwood, Ontario with my family. As one of Canada's 2,900 chicken farmers, I usually speak about agriculture, and as you can appreciate, I am not an expert in geopolitics. I condemn the invasion of Ukraine from Russia, and I support that Canada is helping Ukraine. Our country cannot be inactive against this aggression. We appreciate appearing today regarding the Ukraine goods remission order. Chicken Farmers of Canada was never consulted on the government's decision to implement this order. When we first learned of it, we reviewed the list of eligible countries that export meat products into Canada and noted that Ukraine was not included. As such, it was clear at that time that the remission order would not be applicable to the Canadian chicken sector. In mid-July, we learned that a CFIA audit of the Ukraine meat inspection system and animal health controls governing the production of poultry meat products took place in 2018 to 2019. As indicated in the CFIA's testimony to this committee on Monday, no further activity has taken place between the conclusion of that audit and its recent work to develop the export certificates that would permit the export of Ukrainian meat to Canada. Given the past few years of uncertainty related to a global pandemic, and now seeing there's a war in Ukraine, this urgent desire to issue the export certificates, despite the risks associated with Ukraine's critical infrastructure, is both questionable and concerning. Food safety is a top priority for Canadians and for Canadian chicken farmers. Our on-farm food safety program enforces the highest food safety standards, is third-party audited, and 100% of our farmers are certified. Although we do not know exactly the specific conditions of the infrastructure and resources available within Ukraine, the daily news on the war provides us with reasons to be concerned about the present performance of their animal health and meat inspection practices, as well as the capacity of CFIA to verify whether these practices are as they were during the 2019 audit. It is reasonable to expect that the situation has changed since 2019. In a United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization report on the impact of the war from July of 2022, they noted that Ukrainian livestock producers lacked physical and economic access to animal health supplies, including commercial veterinary drugs, animal feed, and feed additives. Such a statement from the FAO concerns us about the state of animal health and welfare, as well as the capacity of meat processing and meat inspections systems in the Ukraine. It is our understanding that our largest trading partner, the United States, which conducted its audits of the Ukraine poultry and meat system alongside CFIA inspectors, has delayed its decision regarding Ukraine's export permit until the war is over and they can reassess the state of Ukraine's food safety infrastructure. We have also noticed that no cases of highly pathogenic avian influenza have been reported from Ukraine since January 2022. We want to hear that countries are indeed free of AI. However, given that most countries neighboring Ukraine have made frequent and recent report of AI, we see good reason to question this. When Russia, Poland, and other surrounding countries are facing cases of AI, it leads us to further question the current animal disease surveillance and reporting system in the Ukraine. As Canadian chicken farmers are dealing with the stress of ongoing cases of AI and the associated movement and trade restriction based on World Organization for Animal Health requirements, we strongly want to ensure a level playing field and prevent any further AI spread. We understand the need to support Ukraine, but we want to ensure Canada's efforts do not undermine the food safety of Canadians and the credibility of CFIA. The reports on the destruction of infrastructure such as electricity and water supply, so critical to animal and food safety, and the cases of avian influenza reported surrounding Ukraine leads us to believe that their industry is not operating as it did during the 2019 CFIA audit. In addition, the recent push from CFIA to finalize export certificates without any follow-up visits to the country, given the significant losses to their infrastructure, to assess these systems seems like an unusual practice. We thank the committee for allowing us the opportunity to present our views on the Ukraine goods remission order. And we once again urge the Government of Canada to refrain from issuing the export certificates until a comprehensive intelligence program is put in place to monitor the ongoing integrity of Ukraine's veterinary and critical infrastructure. We sincerely hope that Canada will continue to help Ukraine without putting the food security of Canadians and the reputation of our food import system at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Klontmaker. We'll now turn to the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, either Mr. Michel Ishkin or Zakidelsky. Over to you for up to 5 minutes.
Hi there, it's Ihor Michael Chishin. I'm the Executive Director of the UCC, so I'll be providing the remarks from the UCC. So as you mentioned, Ora Zakidelsky is with me as my colleague here. So thank you for the invitation to address this committee. Our organization is the voice of Canada's Ukrainian community. Our Congress brings together an umbrella network of national, provincial, and local Ukrainian Canadian organizations, and has been leading and coordinating the representation of the interests of our community since 1940. We have worked in shaping Canada's social, economic, and political landscape, and in that capacity, we're pleased to be here today. Certainly the people-to-people ties between Canada and Ukraine go back to more than 130 years, when the first Ukrainians came to Canada looking for a better life, mostly as immigrants who began their work as farmers, and Ukrainians have played a key role in building Canada's agri-food industry ever since. Of course, I have to stress that neither my colleague or I are experts in trade or agriculture, but we are here to provide the committee with some geopolitical context for the study of the Ukraine goods remission order as it relates to duty-free and quota-free imports of supply managed goods into Canada. So as you may know, on February 24th, Russia launched an all-out assault on Ukraine. For over 9 months now, the Ukrainian people with their armed forces have bravely defended the country from Russia's invasion. More recently, the Ukrainian armed forces have liberated thousands of square kilometers of territory held by Russia and taken by Russia in the first weeks and months of the war. With significant Western military and economic assistance, we believe the Ukrainian people will continue to defend their freedom and their country. However, the cost of Russia's war has been devastating. Unable to defeat Ukraine on the battlefield, Russia has undertaken a campaign of terror bombing and missile strikes against Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure. According to recent estimates, 97% of Russian air and missile attacks have been aimed at civilian targets. And through this process, Russia has murdered thousands of innocent people, as well as severely damaged the economic infrastructure in Ukraine. The economic costs are devastating. 30% of the Ukrainian gross domestic product dropped this past year. And the state budget is running a monthly deficit of approximately $5 billion, and next year, a $38 billion deficit. Obviously, the 50% of the next year's budget is planned to go to defense and security. In the first days of the war, our American allies urged Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to leave Kyiv, the capital, then under Russian assault. His well-known response to everyone now is, "I need ammunition, not a ride." In order to keep the economy and government functioning, President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people also need assistance with hard currency. In helping Ukraine to keep its economy working, Canada's government has adopted the Ukraine Goods Remission Order, providing relief through a series of import duties on goods originating from Ukraine, in order to provide stimulus for economic activity. The UCC and our community strongly welcome this initiative by the Government of Canada. Another such example is the new Ukraine Sovereignty Bond, which was successfully completed for a $500 million call yesterday. In our view, Ukraine's victory in the war is not only through our national interest or Europe's strategic interest, it's in Canada's national and strategic economic interest. We believe supporting Ukraine's victory is a cause all Canadians, the individuals, organizations, public and private sector can get behind. We also know through recent opinion polling that from September, that 77% of Canadians believe the Government of Canada should be doing more to provide assistance to Ukraine. These hearings are focused on the poultry industry, which employs about 100,000 people in Ukraine. The opportunity to export their products to Canada is certainly important and invaluable to assist their industry in sustaining itself and providing economic activity, which is so vital to keeping the economy going. We hope that this committee will hear from our community, from the Government of Canada, from other interests, and as well will take all measures to provide assistance to the Ukrainian people to ensure a victory. We thank you for the invitation to appear before the committee, and we will be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much.
If I may, Mr. Chairperson, the interpreter pointed out during the testimony that she could only interpret because she had the text that was provided in advance, but the sound quality otherwise makes interpretation impossible. So therefore, there won't be any questions and answers with the witness. Apparently, tests were conducted, but there seems to be a problem.
And I have a note here asking Mr. Michalskin if you're able to raise the boom on your microphone, and we can try to ask for a better. I'll ask maybe that you say a few words and we can try to get from our interpreters whether or not indeed we can be able to translate moving forward. And if not, then of course we won't.
Certainly. I have a microphone which I've used for previous parliamentary committees, and I did a sound check yesterday. So can you hear me?
I'm still getting thumbs down. I don't know. Maybe can we just make sure your headset is actually plugged in to the computer, or maybe unplug it and replug it in and see if that may make a difference? Or you can also choose on the headset that it actually is indeed your headset and not your audio speakerphone from your computer.
Okay, I have just unplugged and replugged the headset into a hardwired computer that I'm using.
Could you just make sure that your microphone is
Sure.
indeed selected on your computer? I apologize. I'm working at the behest of my translating team here in the room to make sure that they're satisfied. But maybe
Yeah,
once...
I have. John had it under control. I have headset selected, but certainly if there's a problem, my colleague Orest can take over.
Okay, I'm getting the signal that unfortunately there's some issue. I don't know what it necessarily is, but yeah, if your colleague can be able to answer when our colleagues may ask of the UCC, that would be appreciated. Okay, we will turn to questions. Mr. Barlow, I'll start with you, up to 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and again, certainly appreciate the witnesses here. And I do want to stress, I would think all of us on this committee want to do everything we can to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, and certainly we understand the challenges that Ukraine is facing. And certainly for many of us in Western Canada, the immigrants from Ukraine 100 years ago helped establish the agriculture industry in our provinces. But at the same time, our job here is to protect the integrity of our own food supply, which is part of the reason why we are here. I want to start my questions to maybe Mr. Klopmaker or your team. I just want to be clear. In your testimony, you said you were never consulted from AFC or Finance Canada on supply manager or chicken specifically be included in this remission order. Is that correct?
That is correct. No, there was no consultation at all.
We heard from Ag Canada witnesses yesterday or on Monday that there wouldn't be significant, or there haven't been significant volumes of chicken imported to Canada as of yet. But just for clarification, my understanding is the reason that hasn't happened is chicken wasn't included in that remission order initially, but now the export certificate will be signed perhaps imminently, and that will open the door to chicken imports into Canada. Is that correct?
Do you want to go ahead?
Yes. So the chicken was included. Well, the remission order is for all goods. So it did include chicken, technically. But chicken is not permitted for imports yet by Canada because CFI has not concluded their study on issuing import certificates for products coming from Ukraine.
Okay.
And that's why we're bringing this to the committee's attention to look at the food safety aspect.
The other thing that I found interesting yesterday or on Monday on the testimony was there was no economic and impact analysis on what this certificate could mean for our supply managed sector, specifically chicken. Have you heard, or also that this could be minimal? Have you heard from importers in Canada or exporters in Ukraine about interest that there would be in importing chicken from Ukraine should the certificate be signed, and what potentially could be the impact of that?
Thank you for. We know we've been made aware that 2 importers in Canada have been putting pressure on CFIA to issue those export certificates. And when I heard, I was here on Monday and I heard about the volume, and that leads to me, if there's pressure to have those certificates, that means that significant volume can actually come into Canada.
The other question that we asked that they surprisingly, I guess, before you make a decision on this, I would hope you'd have that answer, is what is the volume of chicken produced in Canada compared to the amount of chicken produced in Ukraine?
They produce slightly higher than what we do here in Canada. The only exception, they actually export 40% of their market outside of Ukraine.
The other question that my colleagues asked on Monday that finance or trade couldn't answer is, they discussed a threshold. If we saw the imports get too high, we would put a stop to that. When we asked what that threshold would be, and don't you think that would be a good idea to have that threshold set ahead of time, they couldn't answer. What is your position on not having a threshold, and in your opinion, what would that threshold be in terms of this is a line we cannot cross?
Yes. So, first, our main concern is on food safety. So I don't think any threshold is even worth discussing because we're concerned about the country having the capacity to do proper inspection, to conduct proper analysis on animal health, animal care, and the food safety of products. So we care about the food safety and all the repercussion it can have on the credibility of the Canadian food supply and the Canadian food system overall, too.
I guess my concern with this would be we have a supply managed system in Canada for a reason. In your opinion, does this undermine the idea of supply management? And what message does this send to other trading partners or potential trading partners, how quickly the government eliminated the tariffs and quota on supply management in this case?
So certainly one of the abilities that we have within supply management, and that is around the food safety piece. We have 100% of our farmers are on a on-farm food safety program. 100% of them are audited, so we can ensure that food safety. Our concern is that if we have product coming in from another jurisdiction that does not meet the same thresholds that other imports would have, then the concern is that if we have consumers that do not have the trust within the Canadian chicken that is available to them, because ultimately when they go to the grocery store, they're not going to be aware of whether that product is Ukrainian product or Canadian product.
Time for one last quick question. There's been a report of another outbreak of avian flu in the Chilliwack-Hope area. We've now lost close to 4 million birds in Canada. How much of a potential risk is avian flu to Canada, and certainly not having the monitoring system in place in Ukraine that we would hope is up to standard? What kind of risk does this pose to the Canadian industry?
Certainly avian influenza, when we look at the impact that it's had in Canada on our farmers, I've seen firsthand of what that impact is on some of our farmers, and certainly we have a stringent process as to when we do have a case that is diagnosed on a farm, that farm is automatically shut down, and CFIA steps in.
Mr. Klompmaker, I apologize. Mr. Barlow said that there was a bit of time for a question, but there wasn't really. I tried to give about a 15, 20-second answer, but you were maybe going into a longer preamble, and I want Mr. Drouin to have his 6 minutes. So thank you. We know that certainly, Mr. Drouin, I'll leave that to you, but 6 minutes, over to you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and I'd like to thank all of the witnesses who are in attendance today. I won't have the opportunity. I can't see the egg producers and behind. They're important people. The chicken farmers of Canada are also important, as are the egg farmers of Canada. I'd like to thank Mr. Laliberté, who's a great person from one of the best communities in Canada, the Hawkesbury community, where I grew up myself. Now, obviously, and I sympathize with all of those Ukrainians who are going through a very terrible situation. This is not funny business, and we heard in testimony on Monday that at the Finance Committee that there was an agreement entered into very quickly. They are open to consultation, but there have been a number of stakeholders who had the opportunity to speak with officials from the Department of Finance. Now, I'll ask my questions of the chicken farmers of Canada. As far as the process is concerned, what about predictability in the marketplace? The chicken farmers of Canada produce how many kilograms of chicken annually in the Canadian market, domestic marketplace, please? And I know that Mr. Klompmaker speaks French, doesn't speak French, but perhaps Mr. Laliberté or Mr. Ruel might respond. I do understand both official languages, of course, as you see fit. Well, we produce about 1.3 billion kilograms of chicken per year. There are three pillars of supply management. One is production discipline. We establish our production volumes about 14 weeks before a production period. That's the process that we follow. When we heard that there may be export certificates, or when we know in advance that there might be produce that enters, 4 to 6 weeks is a bit tight for us because our production is already set for that production period. Question, how does your production work per se? In 2008, no economist predicted the recession that hit so hard, except for 2 or 3. So how do you respond in terms of the processors, restaurateurs, consumers? How do you predict the impact when it comes to determining the kilograms of chicken produced in the upcoming months? Response, it's a highly rigorous process. It's part of a FPT operating agreement that was approved by provincial and federal ministers. There's a consultative process that takes place between the provinces and industry stakeholders, including the processors and Restaurants Canada. We conduct marketplace economic analyses, looking at a number of issues. We look at the tariffs, we look at the bulk prices, we look at the volume we have in the itinerary, or in our inventory rather, and normally the production rate is determined 14 weeks in advance to determine the volume that the domestic market needs in Canada. I see. Well, obviously, there's a margin of error. You can't necessarily predict with 100% accuracy how much the domestic market will need in 1 quarter, in 2 quarters. And how do you make adjustments along the road? What's acceptable? Do you have, in statistics, apparently the 6 Sigma, which is for the quality control, but 3% variability or discrepancy is okay. Do you apply that kind of formula in determining production? Do you tolerate a number of outlying results, plus 3%, minus 3%? Is that acceptable or not in your sector? Well, it's not an exact... That's exactly what I was about to say. It's... well, economists and statisticians try to guess how many kilograms Canadians will eat in 14 weeks. And that's basically impossible to say with any degree of specificity. But we do have historical data in terms of consumer trends, especially, for example, over summer, and when there are competing meats that take a bigger market share, for example, turkey, obviously, in Thanksgiving and Christmas periods. So there are factors like that that are taken into account. But obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't specify exactly how many kilograms each Canadian will eat. How do processors make adjustments along the way? Obviously, have to export your chicken and send it to other markets. And let me congratulate you, because inflation in your sector, well, it was a more or less stable price point. There have been some increases, but not as much with the other meats. So congratulations. That's proof is in the pudding that our supply management system is working well. But given that, what do you do when there's less demand, and how do the processors react? Do they start exporting more product? Well, obviously, I can't speak for the processors, but we do have tariff quotas in Canada that permit the export of a certain number of kilograms, and some markets, processors might put their product in an inventory. They might sell frozen product or fresh product. So there are ways of tweaking the system and getting around it. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Tremblay, the floor is yours for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and welcome to all the witnesses, and welcome to my colleagues as well. I'd like to thank you for your testimony here today. I'll have some basic questions first, yes or no. Is it true that Poland is considered a major importer of the avian influenza? Or vector, rather. Yes. According to the CFIA, in Ukraine, there are no cases of the AI. My question is, chicken is a a bird, and birds don't respect borders, do they? Answer, yes. Now, another question, and anyone can respond to this. What are the implications for chicken producers when there is an outbreak of avian influenza on a farm? Well, I'll start in French, but it's important to hear from the President, who is a farmer himself, from his mouth, who knows the experiences that farmers have when there is an outbreak of avian influenza on a farm. It's very tough for producers, so I'll allow Mr. Klompmaker to explain his experiences.
Okay, so from a farmer's perspective, once a flock is diagnosed with AI, automatically the farmer is basically removed from even entering their barns and that. CFIA takes control of it, and they put a quarantine in place around that facility. Once that occurs, then the CFIA will order those birds to be euthanized. Once the birds are euthanized, then we go in through the process of cleaning up that farm and getting it back to a point where it can repopulate. It's basically a cleanup, which is like white glove cleanup on farm. It takes several months to actually get to a point, but what also ends up happening during that quarantine time, there is a buffer zone that is basically established around that farm. So within that, there's restrictions that occur around transportation within that zone, and also anything on and off that farm just does not occur until such time that they get a clean bill of health. For farmers, impact on farmers, it's not just financial. When you take a look at the mental toll that this takes on our farmers, it's grueling for them. We understand the process that we have, and we need to have that process to ensure the safety and no more spread of the product, or of the flu. So it's a very stringent process that we undergo.
Well, from your brief, I understand that the issue today, and that's why you've been called before this committee today, is not just about standards reciprocity, but also safety, food safety. Could you elaborate on that, please? Well, evidently, with the unfortunate situation that Ukraine is experiencing, we're asking ourselves a lot of questions about the health infrastructure that's in place in Ukraine. The example that Mr. Klompmaker gave, well, it's very difficult for the CFIA authorities to carry out that role in a fulsome manner. One might suspect that in an unfortunate situation like the one Ukraine is experiencing, that the usual infrastructure isn't as it should be. And what we're hearing to date from the CFIA authorities is that, well, we've been told that the service is working as usual in Ukraine, and that our verifications go back to 2019, that those mechanisms are still in place. But I imagine that out in the field, the situation has changed greatly. I've never been to Ukraine, but what we can see, things just seem vastly different, and it's really hard to believe that the entire food safety system is operating like it did in 2019. Question. So you're saying that the last update, quote unquote, was in 2019, but the big outbreaks of avian influenza were, what, last year, right? Response. I said in 2019 because it's in 2019 that the CFIA conducted a verification of the Ukrainian system. Avian influenza, well, there's been a lot of it throughout Europe and in Canada since January this year. Therefore, there's a big problem that has raised its ugly head since the last verification process. Now, on Monday, we had witnesses who said that they didn't expect high export volumes. Have you heard that Canadian importers are very interested in importing Ukrainian product? Well, it is our understanding that there are two importers who are lobbying the government, especially the CFIA, to issue these export certificates in short order. Now, if they're putting pressure on them, obviously they want to import chicken product from Ukraine. There's no data that will demonstrate that this is going to be a small volume. As we mentioned earlier, there have been zero imports for a while because it's been banned. As soon as these exports are issued, we expect high volumes. Well, the government officials said that they could amend the remission order. Sorry to cut you off. Your 6 minutes has run out. We'll pick up where we left off later.
Pour 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today, providing testimony. My first questions are going to be for our witnesses from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, and I just want to first say thank you for the work that you're doing, both to advocate for people in Ukraine, for those who are coming to Canada, and then also just for the support you give to the Ukrainian communities across Canada. I know our local chapter does a lot of work in my riding, so thank you. I'm sure that you've heard a lot of concern around this table about safety and about avian influenza. I wanted to ask, I know the Ukrainian Canadian Congress was advocating for modernizing the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement just before the unjustified and atrocious war that Russia launched on Ukraine. We know that we've been lifting tariffs on Ukrainian products. Can you talk about some of the others in the agricultural sector that have been or that you'd like to see lifted?
Well, I mean, our position on tariffs, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Our position on Canadian tariffs on Ukrainian goods is that for the time that Ukraine is suffering a genocidal war, we believe that it is helpful to Ukraine for Canada to lift those tariffs and allow for freer imports of Ukrainian goods. Now, in terms of the issue we're talking about today, chicken, we're not, food inspection experts. I will note, however, that the European Union is importing Ukrainian chicken and has similarly lifted tariffs on it. So, I mean, if the implication made by our friends here is that the Europeans are lax in their safety standards, then I would invite the committee to ask the European Union representatives to come here and to talk about their safety standards. But in terms of tariffs, I think a blanket lifting of tariffs on Ukrainian goods is something that we support from Canada, and partly why we strongly support this order. Thank you.
Thanks. Do you know where, and it's okay if you don't have the answers to these, some of these were going to be directed at the Deputy Minister, but do you have a sense of where in Ukraine Canada would be getting kind of increased volumes of chicken and eggs?
You mean geographically?
Geographically.
I don't have that information, like where exactly these products would be coming from. I think when you hear from the Deputy Minister, I'm sure you'll be able to answer those questions.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Maybe turning now to Mr. Klumpmaker. The government representatives had talked about kind of the short-term impact of the remission order, that it's just until June 9th, 2023. In your opinion, what is the length of potential impact of this?
Given the fact that majority of the product that would come in would probably be frozen product, it has the potential to sit in freezers for a year. So if we had product coming in until June, it could potentially have impact on us until June of 2024. It's not about just within that time frame between now and June of 2023.
And you'd mentioned in your opening statement, but also in responses to questions about not being consulted by government. Is this normal that you wouldn't be consulted by government, or do you know who was consulted from the industry?
We don't know who was consulted or if anybody was consulted, but it came as a surprise to us.
Okay. And then just maybe for my knowledge, can you share just a little bit of background in terms of the proceeds from sales of products that are sold to consumers? How much go to the people producing it, and how much go to importers?
Difficult question because first, like, we often just talk about chicken, but it will depend for every cuts. They sell some as whole birds, but they sell some as wings, breast, boneless breast. There's more value and more work done in a boneless breast, for example. Then they also sell other products that will be into like further processed products, chicken meals. So it's very tough to answer that just like that because it will be specific for each cuts. Depends of different market also. So I think I would misguide you if I provide any firm answer.
Thanks so much. And just hearing from the witnesses from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, given that the EU is importing chicken, why do you think they've decided to make that decision, given the concerns that you've raised here today about avian influenza and especially about potentially the lack of reporting that might be happening?
There's been a long established relationship, I don't know since when, but there's been a lot of trade between Ukraine and EU in various products, but in chicken as well. So this is not new. So there was ongoing trade before the war with EU, and they decided to maintain it. I don't know if there's more relationship already established. In our case, we never imported any chicken. The only information that we have, well, I say we, but CFIA, it dates from an audit from 2019. U.S. at the same time decided also to not allow any importation from Ukraine until after the war. They will reassess after the war. So many other countries have not.
Thank you, Mr. Ruel. And sorry, Miss Collins, I called you Monsieur as opposed to Madame Collins. Working on my French, and my apologies about that. Madame Rude, you now have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for appearing today. I'm just going to ask Mr. Ruel if you can continue on the point that you were making there, because as you've just mentioned, our number one trading partner is not allowing importation of chicken from Ukraine at this point. So can you just elaborate on how that impacts the industry and why they've made that decision, and perhaps why Canada should have looked at the U.S. when making their decision as well?
Well, I cannot speak for the rationale or reasons for the U.S. to decide to wait until after the war, but I suspect that similar to some of the concerns we mentioned, what we see, what we witness from what's occurring in Ukraine seems to be a very tough situation, as we've heard also from our witness with all the missiles targeting civilian infrastructure. We can expect that there are some disruption in the country, unfortunately. So I suspect that's some of the reason that led the U.S. to decide to wait until after the war to decide to allow the imports of chicken products from Ukraine.
I think what you were talking about earlier, though, was down the food safety aspect. Like, there is a food safety aspect. Like you just mentioned, there is a war happening. So how can we be sure that the food coming over is safe? And I think Mr. Klompmaker alluded to this earlier. If consumers don't know what they're getting, and we risk losing consumer confidence in a product that Canadian farmers, chicken farmers especially, have worked really hard to get to a point where consumers have absolute confidence in our food safety system here in Canada, and that's partially because of supply management and the stringent standards that we do have in Canada. So do you care to comment on that at all?
I think there are many angles to consider, but if you just look, for example, at the electricity, the water supply that you need to operate chicken farms, chicken processing plants, that must be a tough struggle for the industry in Ukraine to operate. Do you have access to all the sanitation, the chemicals basically that they need to sanitize the processing plants? So there are many details that we don't suspect sitting here in a committee room that takes place in a processing plant that must be very tough to get going on a frequent basis or on a daily basis in the country.
Well, we know right now that other countries are paying very close attention to this because we have many trading partners around the world, and supply management is something that is unique to Canada. And with that being said, how will opening up this imports from chicken to Ukraine, how will that affect potential future negotiations, or how is that going to affect our trading partners now? If we look, for example, we have Kuzma coming up for a review at some point. It's a joint review. So do you think that by this government opening up chicken into a supply and managed commodity from Ukraine with this remission order will affect trading with our other countries going forward and how we conduct those negotiations?
So, tough to speculate again on the reactions from other countries, but Ukraine already has access to Canada under the WTO TRQ. The only reason why there was no import so far, it's only because CFIA had never permitted products from Ukraine. So they have access to our WTO concessions that were made in WTO agreements.
We talked a little bit earlier about avian influenza and the impact it would have, you said specifically on farmers, but I'm just wondering if there's a dollar figure, if you can tell us what the industry is worth and how it could potentially impact the industry if we were to have avian influenza here, potentially brought in from some imports of chicken. I did ask officials earlier in the week if they had done an economic assessment of what it would cost our chicken industry, and I didn't get an answer from them. So I'm just wondering if you have some sort of answer, even a ballpark figure of what it would be costing to our farmers and to the industry.
So first, there are some cases of avian influenza in Canada currently, and as Mr. Klumpmaker mentioned, how tough it is for farmers to deal with it. The concerns is very much that it's kind of strange that there's been no cases reported since January from Ukraine. It points more to a challenge in the surveillance and reporting system, and I think that's what's important to take. Why there are no cases reported? Is it because there are no cases, or because they don't have the resources to do the surveillance and monitoring?
We're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Ruel. Thank you, Ms. Rude. Deputy Minister Kashka, I do see you online. We do have technical requirements of a headset, and I know that my clerk wanted to make sure that you know, if you can hear me, that our technical team is trying to reach you so that you are able to testify. So if you see a call, it's from them to try to help make sure that you have the technical requirements to participate. We do see you online. Thank you for being here, but we do need to make sure that you have a proper headset. So, Mr. Turnbull, up to 5 minutes. We'll go from there.
So, Chair, just to be clear, I'm not able at this time to ask the Deputy Minister Kachka any questions. Is that right?
Unfortunately not, but if he is able to get a proper headset, I think, assuming this committee is open to it, we could allow him in the second panel.
Okay, thank you. I hope that doesn't take away from my time. On February 24th, 2022, we all know Russia invaded Ukraine, and for me, it was the only day in my life that I actually woke up and considered that sometime in my life I might actually go to fight in a war. I want to just express my sincere solidarity with the people of Ukraine and the incredible heroic effort that they've put into defending their sovereignty. In every aspect of, they're really an inspiration to all of us. And that's heartfelt straight from me. Thank you. So I just wanted to ask perhaps Mr. Zakandin, oh my gosh, I really have trouble with your last name. Zakaldelsky, I hope I said it right. I'm sorry for mispronouncing it.
You got it.
What other countries that you know of have signed a blanket remission order or a similar measure in support of Ukraine? Could you give us just a few examples?
So the European Union and the United Kingdom. There may be more. I'm, again, not an expert on this issue, so...
Thank you.
Certainly the European Union and the UK.
So they're similar in terms of Canada's response in quickly reacting to the situation in Ukraine to show that solidarity. Is that right?
Laudably so, yes.
Thank you. And perhaps over to our other panelists who are here in person. I noticed that Mr. Drouin's line of questioning was quite interesting, that I know that our supply managed sector is doing a delicate balancing act in production planning and processing, and there's quite a bit to balance in terms of fluctuations in the market, I'm sure, that are quite natural to experience, and you have historical data, as you said, but there's adjustments that you're making fairly regularly. Is that right, Mr. Klumpmaker?
We do look at production volumes on an 8-week basis. So every block of 8 period, or every 8 weeks, we set a production volume.
Great. And I know that what we heard from the I think it was the Assistant Deputy Minister earlier in the week was that they anticipated that likely the impact on our poultry sector would be less than 1% of the market share, if at all. So it was sounded pretty minimal to me, and I know that you're better to answer this, so I just want to pose to you, but is an adjustment of less than 1% something that you can kind of accommodate in terms of that delicate balancing act? It sounds like you're pretty used to dealing with fluctuations in the market. If less than 1% was the overall impact of this measure, would you be able to accommodate that? Because I know you expressed your sentiments in solidarity with Ukraine, and we all recognize that we need to do whatever we can to support them. So can you accommodate that?
Yeah, so I don't know how it came with this estimate, because one thing that's clear with the remission order, it implies unlimited volume. Because what the remission order does is that it completely removes any limit on imports coming from Ukraine. We know, as has been mentioned earlier, that at least 2 importers have put pressure to bring imports, and apparently they are large importers. What is the volume that they have in their mind? No one knows. But back to what we mentioned, the concerns is very much with the food safety. Is the infrastructure still in place to perform all the verification?
Thank you, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm going to ask you a question about that, so maybe I can just follow up on that. I know you've mentioned that there's been cases of AI in Canada, is that correct? And cases that have been verified in Europe. Is that correct? But no cases that have been reported in Ukraine. Is that correct, Mr. Rule?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess, and I know, like, based on the testimony we heard early in the week, I'm trying to piece all the bits of information, so bear with me for a sec. But CFIA told us that they got assurances from Ukraine that they're going to do assessments of food safety assessments on the first 10 shipments from each supplier. Okay, and then move to a risk-based assessment process where they identify based on risks and test more. So, and I know food safety is something that Canada prides itself in. It prides itself in having an extremely strong system to prevent against, and still, we still have cases at times.
Mr. Turnbull, I apologize. I wanted to give you a little bit of time. Maybe I have to be a little bit stricter with my colleagues and give you a bit more heads up. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. Monsieur Tremblay.
2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes, perfect. So I don't want you to think that your demands are incompatible with solidarity with Ukraine. I want that to be made clear right off the bat. Now, it's important to know that other countries have proceeded with remission orders, but those countries don't have supply managed systems like ours, so that limits the comparison. But nevertheless, if there are other markets, what products would come here? Our market is different from Europe's, right? So what products would come here? Well, it's up to the importers to determine what their preferences are, but in all likelihood, Canada and the North American marketplace favours chicken wings. So we would expect that chicken wings produced in Ukraine would come to Canada. Now, if there was a massive influx of Ukrainian chicken wings, what would that mean? Well, as far as impact on the marketplace is concerned, well, I should repeat that the main concern is food safety, regardless of the type of product or volume. That's our main concern. However, were the product to be completely safe and able to enter Canada, the production of chicken wings is a small segment of all chicken production. So a couple of million kilograms will have a disproportionate impact because the domestic market of chicken wings is already very small in Canada.
50 seconds.
50 seconds, I see. Terrific. So at what point, given that we know that there will be close follow-up, but if there are large volumes imported, the officials tell us that the remission order can be modified. So when would you think that this is a cause for concern? As I said earlier, it's more about the food safety than anything else, and I'll leave it up to the government to determine when it decides to amend the remission order. Well, thank you very much. Quite clearly from your testimony, there will need to be updates made.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Tremblay, Monsieur Ruel. Maintenant, Madame.
Now, Ms. Collins, for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, for our witnesses from the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, can you, just because, I think the concern here really is about food safety, and so can you talk a little bit about how difficult it is for Ukrainians to access things like medications, sanitation products, how frequent power disruptions are and water disruptions, and what you see as some of the mitigating factors when it comes to the concerns that you've heard raised today?
In terms of access to electricity, it depends entirely on how frequently and where the Russians strike Ukrainian infrastructure with missile attacks. So there has been a marked increase in attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure in the last 6 weeks or so. Same with water facilities and same with medical facilities. So, part of Russia's war against Ukraine is that it is purposely trying to murder civilians.
Yeah.
And that's something we should all remember. Again, in terms of what impact that has on the food industry and the production of goods, I would simply say that as far as we know, the Ukrainian system for food safety, etc., is functioning as it should be. Ukraine is part of the all the international organizations to which it reports on these issues, and the European system is also in place that
30 seconds.
Food
I've only got 30
safety
seconds left.
For European Union. So I mean, I'm not an expert on the issue, but it seems it's functioning fairly well.
Thank you. And just out of curiosity, if the CFI kind of shares these concerns about food safety, if they were to make a different decision about the importation of chicken, are there ways that Canada could better support Ukraine, either in the agricultural sector or other trade-related or other supports you see?
I mean, the most important thing Canada can do to support Ukraine is twofold. One is to deliver weapons to the Ukrainian military, and second is to assist the Ukrainian government in being able to meet its budgetary requirements. And so this trade is one of the ways in which we can help the second part of that of those two issues.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Collins.
you so much.
Colleagues, that brings us to the end of panel number one. I'm going to exercise just one brief question to chicken farmers of Canada. And you mentioned it, Mr. Klopmaker, I think in one of the questions that Mr. Drouin asked, which was, where does the market go? I think you mentioned 40% goes to the European Union. And I just want to build on Ms. Collins' point because I think it's really important about the market access. I have the most supply managed farms east of Quebec, and I think that that's an important element. But you really touched on food security. Are you aware of any type of regulatory parameters that the European Union has put on the importation of chicken from Ukraine to Europe? So have they put out any advisories? Have they put any type of procedure in place to highlight some of the same concerns about avian influenza and other things that you've mentioned here today? I know you shouldn't be expected to be experts in European Union regulatory policy, but given the fact that I know you've spoken a lot about today, do you have any highlights or any reflections for this committee on their concern or lack thereof in that regard?
No, we're not aware of any restrictions that the European Union would have put on. The only thing we know is that because since the war started, that the imports from Ukraine to the EU essentially is up 100%. It's quite high.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we're going to take a short break and then we're going to be back for the second panel. So please don't go far. And thank you so much to our witnesses for joining us here today and for your testimony. panel. Great to see this many people in the room for Agriculture Committee, and Ms. Collins actually correctly identified that we've got great food at the Agriculture Committee. Of course, Canadian product, whether it be milk products, chicken, and the whole vegetables, the whole bit. We make sure we take care of our members. Colleagues, second panel. With us today, we have Katrina Coughlin, who is a partner at Gowling, WLG Canada. Ms. Coughlin, welcome to the committee. From the Canadian Poultry and Egg Processors Council, Ian McFall, who is the chair of the board of directors. He is online with us. And we also have Jean-Michel Laurent, who is the president and chief executive officer here in the room. Monsieur Laurent, welcome. And from Egg Farmers of Canada, we have Roger Pellicerio, who is the chair, and Tim Lambert. And Roger told me he doesn't wear a tie often, so this is great to have you here. You're looking sharp, Mr. Pellicerio. So we're going to give 5 minutes to each of the different witnesses and organizations who are here. We're going to start with Ms. Coughlin. Up to 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the committee for inviting me to speak today. I'm a lawyer based in Ottawa and advise clients in the food industry on issues pertaining to Canadian food safety laws, regulations, and policies. I'm here as an individual, and my evidence today represents my own views, not those of the firm. In my work, I regularly advise clients on requirements under the Safe Food for Canadians Act and Health of Animals Act and their regulations, as well as the associated policies, procedures, and guidance published by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. As a result, I have knowledge of Canada's food safety requirements, including those generally associated with the recognition of foreign systems under the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, or SFCR. I'm honored to be here today to provide the committee with information on this topic to assist in the study. Under the SFCA and SFCR, all imported food products must be manufactured, prepared, stored, packaged, and labeled in a manner and under conditions providing at least the same level of protection as food products produced in Canada. Food importers must obtain a Safe Food for Canadians license and are responsible for ensuring that the food safety-related requirements set out in the SFCR are being met. There is a further requirement specifically for meat products, including poultry. These products can only be imported to Canada from a country that CFIA has recognized as having an inspection system for meat products that provides the same level of protection as that of Canada. As CFIA testified on Monday, an audit was conducted in Ukraine in 2019 as part of this recognition process. Once a foreign inspection system is recognized, CFIA negotiates the terms of the Official Meat Inspection Certificate, or OMIC, that must be used by the exporting country for meat shipments destined for Canada. CFIA's recognition of a foreign inspection system can include limitations or special conditions. For example, there may be conditions with respect to species, product preparation, or geographic regions or zones within the country. Pursuant to Section 170, Sub 3 of the SFCR, when reviewing a foreign state's inspection system, the CFIA takes into account any applicable legislative framework, controls, and procedures, the organizational structure of the authority that is responsible for the system, the implementation of the system, the resources that support the objectives of the system, the humane treatment of the food animals that are intended to be slaughtered, the chemical residue monitoring and microbiological monitoring of the meat products, the certification process for the export of the meat products, and any other relevant information. As it relates to these considerations, an event such as the terrible invasion taking place in Ukraine may impact the implementation of a food inspection system, as well as the resources that support the system. Therefore, the occurrence of such an event would reasonably be considered as part of CFIA's recognition determination under the regulations. Another relevant consideration related to recognition of a foreign inspection system is the animal health status of the country with respect to diseases of concern, such as highly pathogenic avian influenza. To that end, CFIA publishes information on the countries, regions, or zones that it recognizes as being free of disease of concern. If a country is not recognized as being free of a disease, or a country usually recognized as free of a disease is experiencing an outbreak, importation of certain products may be prohibited to protect the Canadian food supply system, or special conditions may be negotiated for the OMIC. As noted by CFIA in their published guidance, the evaluation of disease-free status of a country, region, or zone is reviewed by CFIA on a case-by-case basis. CFIA also indicates in its guidance that recognition of disease freedom is not solely dependent on the World Organization of Animal Health, WOA, status, or country self-determination. Therefore, as it relates to this study, Ukraine's current WOA status for avian influenza is one consideration for CFIA's risk assessment, but should not necessarily be determinative of whether CFIA considers the country to be free of the disease. If there is a change to a recognized foreign inspection system or a country's animal health status, CFIA may negotiate revised conditions for the OMIC. Furthermore, The SFCR contemplates the suspension of a foreign inspection system if there is a material change. Under subsection 172 sub 1, the minister must suspend the recognition of a foreign state's inspection system if the foreign state fails to notify the minister in writing as soon as feasible of any change that it has made to the system or to the legislation governing the system, or the system no longer provides at least the same level of protection as that provided by the provisions of the SFCA and SFCR. The foreign inspection system recognition can then be reinstated once the circumstances that gave rise to the suspension have been remedied. Thank you for your time. I hope this overview of the Canadian food safety legal context is of assistance to the committee, and happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Coughlin. We'll now turn to either Mr. McFall or Mr. Laurent on behalf of Canadian Poultry and Egg Processors Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to appear before the committee. My name is Ian McFall, and I'm here as chair of the Canadian Poultry and Egg Processors Council's Board of Directors. I'm joined today by CPPC's President and CEO, Jean-Michel Laurent. We're pleased to take part in this study on the Ukraine goods remission order. Before sharing our news on this topic, I'd like to remind everyone that CPPC represents Canadian hatcheries, egg graders and processors, and chicken and turkey processors and further processors. Collectively, our membership represents more than 180 establishments of all sizes and collectively processes over 90% of the poultry and egg products raised by Canadian farmers. First off, we want to say that we recognize the very difficult situation faced by Ukrainians and the Ukrainian agriculture and food industry, and the need for our government to take a broad range of actions aimed at supporting Ukraine in these difficult times. Before talking about the remission order specifically, let me provide some broader context on the role of imports in our industry. As you know, poultry and egg production in Canada is governed by supply management, and for this reason, our industry's main focus is to supply the Canadian market. Supply management rests on three pillars, import controls being one of them. Imports usually come in using quotas called TRQs. Those are set import quantities negotiated in trade agreements. They cap how much can be imported in any given year. When producers set production volumes based on Canadian market demand, they take those import volumes into account. I should also mention that our members receive a significant share of the TRQs allocated every year. If products come into Canada outside of the quota system, our members would therefore be directly impacted. While the remission order has been in place since June, Ukraine is not currently authorized to export poultry and egg products to Canada. CFIA briefed you on Ukraine's request to get some of their establishments certified to export to Canada and where that stands. That request to certify 3 Ukrainian chicken processing plants was made in 2019, but we only became aware of it recently. We also hear that Ukraine made a similar request to export egg products to Canada. It's also known that Ukraine is a major chicken exporter, as evidenced by the significant increase in their exports to Europe this year. Allowing Ukrainian chicken plants to export to Canada under the current remission order in a supply-managed environment could have a significant disruptive impact on Canadian processors, our suppliers, and our customers. We are greatly concerned by this potential impact. TRQ is key to managing imports and supply. Any measure that allows products to enter Canada without quota makes it very difficult to forecast imports. The market could be short if we overestimate imports, or long if we underestimate how much product will come in. Either scenario could have significant impacts on different parts of our value chain. In other words, not knowing the exact quantities that could enter jeopardizes our ability to ensure the market is properly supplied. If, following the completion of their process, CFIA issues official meat import certificates to Ukraine, it would be critical that government and industry work together to manage and mitigate risks to the supply management system. In addition, it would be critical for us to receive trade information as soon as possible. We were pleased to hear that Ukraine agreed to voluntarily share that information with CFIA before any products would leave Ukraine. The government should also be ready to consider introducing a cap or safeguard measures if imports prove disruptive to the Canadian market. Finally, if the government considers renewing the remission order in 2023, We believe it would be best to exclude supply managed products. Poultry and egg products from Ukraine would then be allowed to enter Canada using the TRQ process. Mr. Chair, I will end my remarks here, and JM and I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McFall. We'll now turn to either Mr. Pellisario or Mr. Lambert, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee. It's great to be here today. You're going to sound like we're repeating messages you've heard already. A very unfortunate situation that took place February 24th when Russia declared war on the Ukraine. It's not a good situation at all. My grandfather immigrated from the Ukraine back in 1927. So it's kind of near and dear to my heart, too, even though my last name's Pellicero. I'm Italian on one side, Ukrainian on the other side, born in Canada, and I'm just confused and mixed up, and that's why I'm wearing a tie today. But in all seriousness, we're here today to discuss those same concerns that our colleagues have discussed regarding food safety. In the egg sector, there's 1,200 family farms across this country producing eggs each and every day for Canadians so that they have them to buy in the grocery stores. Delivers roughly 19,000 jobs and adds $1.3 billion to our GDP. We are very thankful for the measures that the government took to support the Ukraine in this crisis. However, it'd be not wise of us to not raise our concerns here today regarding the remission order and how it relates to Canada's egg farming sector. While the intent of the remission order is to support the Ukrainian farmers, our concerns shine a light on the complexity and the hasty decisions when it comes to the trade of food items. It is likely that once the CFIA completes the export certificate process for egg and egg products, that large egg processing companies based in Ukraine could leverage this remission order. And I'm also a member of the International Egg Commission and office holder there. There is one large processor in Ukraine, Ovostar is their name, and they also the largest egg producer in the Ukraine with 6.4 million layers. That's 8% of the production of the Ukraine. So our concern is, would they be helping all the Ukrainian farmers, or would it be one producer and one processor benefiting from all of this? As far as traceability and food safety program in there, they also have a processing facility in Latava. And so does that mean that will products flow in from there? We're not sure or not. We hope it wouldn't be if that was the case. When we talk about the welfare standards of hens and the high level of accountability through audits for our farmers each and every day that we take place, it's rigorous. And we have a concern with the unfortunate situation that's happening in the Ukraine. We know the ability of these farmers just to farm each and every day is enough on them, never mind the audits that they have to have in place each and every day. So I can't imagine being able to deal with a war and doing all the paperwork that I need to do as a farmer each and every day to make sure I could export something through a processor to come to Canada. So as we continue to talk about, the things that are unfolding, we cannot guarantee what type of level of production will be tapped into. And we just came through COVID where we're managing that. We're pivoting almost on a weekly basis with the spikes, opening and closings of restaurants and how that affects the production. And not once were we, shorted the market. But with trade agreements and TRQs, like was mentioned by Mr. McFall, it makes things far more manageable for us to be able to do and doesn't impact our farmers each and every day. The other talk like that we'll identify will be highlighted by Mr. Lambert, so I'll pass it over to Tim.
Thanks very much, Roger. The third matter to highlight for us this evening is the impact of allowing unlimited duty-free egg imports from the Ukraine into Canada. This approach weakens the Canadian egg farming sector by removing our ability to plan our domestic production net of imports, which is a fundamental element of supply management. Allowing an unclear volume of foreign eggs or egg products into our country has a direct impact on our national economy and rural communities. While the implications across our sector are significant, the equation is rather simple. An increase in imported eggs means fewer domestically produced eggs. This affects not only the livelihood of our farmers, but also the recovery of rural Canadian communities in a post-COVID economy. Our farmers are committed to continuing to feed Canadians and providing strong domestic food security today and tomorrow. However, displacing Canadian products with foreign products takes income from Canadian family farms and the many small businesses that rely on those farms in rural communities. While it is difficult to say what volume of egg or egg products may enter Canada under the remission order, we encourage government to consider solutions that minimize the impact on Canadians and our domestic agriculture community while supporting the people of Ukraine. As we conclude, there is one final item that we wish to raise with you today. According to the World Food Program, as many as 1 in 3 Ukrainians are food insecure. We encourage our government to consider ways to work with Ukrainian officials and farmers to address the food crisis the country is experiencing, rather than establishing channels to allow a few large companies the opportunity to export a staple food out of a country experiencing a food crisis. We offer our collaboration and assistance to find ways to help Ukrainian farmers directly and support their domestic food supply. We thank the members of the committee for your time.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lambert. Thank you, Mr. Lambert. We have a question and answer period now. Mr. Liu, 6 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you, witnesses, for being here with us today. The information is highly relevant, Mr. Lambert, that you just communicated to us. That is that 1/3 of Ukrainians is food insecure. That must be borne in mind. Can Canada help both Ukrainian producers and people themselves? Could you elaborate on that issue, please?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think obviously everybody in this room very much cares about what's happening. This is just a tragedy and a humanitarian disaster. Are there other ways besides imports that we could all work together collaboratively, supporting the rebuilding of the country in some way? We have technology, we have expertise. Roger referenced the work he does with the International Aid Commission. I'm past chairman of that organization as well. And we do a lot of work in right now, sub-Saharan Africa, in supporting development of helping farms become commercially viable. I'm convinced there's many, many ways we could work collaboratively with Ukrainian farmers and industry as they try to rebuild their nation coming out of this war, whenever that would end. So I think there are tangible things that we can do.
Merci.
Thank you. A quick question for the processors and to the farmers. Were you consulted by the government before this remission order was signed? Perhaps I could respond first. Well, as Mr. McPhail mentioned, we knew that there was something afoot, a remission order in June. We weren't contacted earlier, but as Mr. McFall said, we got wind that Ukraine in 2019 had submitted a request regarding egg processing facilities. We learned that in October, and we understood that there was a request regarding eggs.
Yeah, so from the farmer side, we were not consulted at all, and we would appreciate moving forward if we could be consulted. I think we could find a path that would help with the collaborative nature to some of these challenges.
Merci.
Thank you. And perhaps for the processors, on Monday we had witnesses from Agriculture Canada that said that they didn't expect huge volumes to be coming in. Do you know any importers that are interested in importing large volumes, and would you have a sense of what kind of volumes? Response. Well, to estimate the volumes, as my colleagues mentioned, this is unprecedented, where products would come into Canada without tariffs, without limits on the volumes that could be imported. So, as I said, there's no reference point that we can rely on in terms of this. Now, what I can say, are there companies that are interested in importing? I think that our colleagues got wind of 2 importing companies that seem to be interested in this. Our members, the major processors and mid-sized processors, well, I haven't heard that they're necessarily interested, but there are specialized businesses in importation, and I imagine that it's them that are interested in this. Now, a lot of the TRQs are allocated to processors, but there are a lot of other players in international trade in the sector, and I can elaborate on that if you wish. Well, yes, perhaps you could, but a very straightforward question. These companies and producers that might be interested in importing produce, are they Canadian companies or are they from somewhere else? Are they homegrown companies? Perhaps Ms. Coughlin can respond to that. I'm not an expert on this, but to import to Canada, you need a license from the Canada Food Inspection Agency. You have to be a resident of Canada to be able to import, as far as I know. Question. Well, some companies are supposedly Canadian-owned, but most of their business isn't Canadian-driven. Ms. Coughlin?
I mean, I can't really comment. There certainly can be situations where a large corporation that is not Canadian-owned has a Canadian operation and holds an SFC import license at that address.
In terms of the impact that avian influenza might have, we know that neighbouring countries to Ukraine are facing issues. What impact does avian influenza have on processing when produce comes in from regions that are stricken with avian influenza? As producers, what effect will that have? 30 seconds. Well, Ukraine and Canada are both affected by AI. We just want to ensure that international standards when it comes to avian influenza are upheld. If products come from an area affected by avian influenza, well, the same controls must be in place. The same is true of meat. We rely on the CFIA to ensure that countries that we trade with, that there are proper controls in place. Thank you very much. Mr. Longfield, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person today. I'm subbing for one of our members, so I'm live from Guelph. Mr. Pellicero, it's great to see you again, and thank you for welcoming me to your farm, and your production area is world class. And the eggs I brought back to Guelph were also world class. So thank you for what you do there. Also, I'm thinking of how eggs in Canada, or Egg Canada is supporting before school programs and is a real key contributor to helping children in Canada with nutrition before school. What I'm thinking of as I'm listening to the conversation is how we can support Ukrainian children and farmers in the way that Canadians are supported. And I'm also thinking of the three major trade agreements that were negotiated, and we've now done some compensation agreements up to $4.8 billion for supply managed sectors that could be affected by trade agreements. Mr. Pellicero, this is a temporary measure that we're looking at. It's not a trade agreement with a long-standing go forward on the industry. It's something that we're trying to help a country that's fighting an illegal war that's being forced on them by Russia. Could you maybe comment on the relationship that Egg Canada has had with Canada, what the egg producers have done to support food insecurity in Canada, how that might relate to the situation we're discussing this afternoon?
Yeah, thank you. And good to see you, Mr. Longfield. Too bad it wouldn't be in person. It was great to have you at my farm that day. And I have an open door policy if you want to be able to visit an egg farm. And anytime you're down in the Niagara Peninsula, we could do eggs in the morning and go down the wine area and maybe do some wine tasting in the afternoon. But to the question at hand, Mr. Longfield, you know, we support nutrition is a top priority. We want to make sure children have the right start to the day. We know that eggs help them stay focused. So we're involved in early nutrition for infants. We're involved with egg nutrition programs. We're involved in food banks. And like Mr. Lambert referenced earlier, if there's ways and discussions that we can have to help the Ukrainian people in this time of food crisis when there's 1 in 3 that are going without the necessary items, we'd be more than happy and engage in those discussions and talk about some of the ways that we do it here in Canada and help to benefit those over there struggling right now. Maybe Mr. Lambert has a few comments to add.
And actually, I can give a very specific example. We, Egg Farmers of Canada, built an egg farm on an orphanage in Eswatini, Africa. So we supply about 4,300 hard-cooked eggs through a network of 30 churches and schools. One of our challenges, we did this without refrigeration, and so we worked with a Danish company, actually, who custom designed and built equipment to hard-cook, chill, and preserve the eggs. We did trials on hard-cooked eggs where we held them for up to 30 days at 30 degrees Celsius with zero spoilage. So we act back to the point I made very early on in my remarks. We believe there's other ways we can directly support kind of the rebuild as eventually Ukraine starts to come through that. And that is a specific example of something we're currently doing.
I think with respect, I mean, the farmers are supported by moving product, and moving product through the facilities that we would be drawing on is directly supporting farmers. It's also supporting the government, who needs revenue to fight the costly war that they're facing. It just seems there's a disconnect there somewhere, that we are looking at everything we can do to support within food safety regulations that we have in Canada, and it seems like we could be doing more. That's back to you. So maybe I can flip that one over to Mr. McFall.
JM, would you like to comment, or I can?
Well, just one thought that came to mind is I remember when one of the things Canada did was to try to host Ukrainian displaced Ukrainians who are seeking shelter while their country was going through what they're going through right now. And I know we work very closely with Minister of Immigration, and I mean, essentially it was all a government effort, but tried to recruit or direct as many of those Ukrainians who were looking for jobs and lived in communities where we had poultry and egg processing establishments. We all know we're facing some unprecedented labor shortages in our industry, and we thought maybe this is a way we could actually help. And I know this might not have happened in as concerted a way we would have liked it to see, but I know we've got several members in communities across the country that have been able to help that way.
We're helping in an emergency situation. We're in the middle of a war situation, so consultations have always happened and will happen and go on an ongoing basis. But moving product is really, helping the farmers move their product is really what I want to see us being able to do.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield. We've got 5 seconds, but you'll cede those 5 seconds to the committee. And I just want to say you've got a beautiful picture in behind you there. I'll have to follow up and see who did that picture. Maintenant, Monsieur Tremblay.
Mr. Tremblay, 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, and greetings to our witnesses. Mr. Laurent, you said that you didn't get wind of the fact that there were importers interested and processors. But the chicken farmers said that there were a couple of importers interested. Given your position, could you please talk about the potential impact on prices were this to eventuate? That's an excellent question. Well, just to correct what I said earlier, now, the producers did say that there were importers that were interested in importing certain volumes. That doesn't surprise me. As I mentioned to your colleague, Mr. Lehoux, there are a number of companies that are specialized in international trade, and among our members, maybe there are some too. But as far as impact on prices are concerned, it depends on the volumes that are imported and our ability to make adjustments in line with any volumes that do enter Canada. I know that the committee is interested in assessing what quantity of produce might enter the country. We don't have any data or reference points to work from. I know that folks from the department, officials, said that based on their predictions, It wouldn't be substantive or enough to upset the industry, but it won't take huge volumes to have an impact. Everything depends on the type of product that comes into Canada and the volume, how quickly it comes in, and all of that might come into play. I know that the witnesses who appeared on Monday said that in terms of dairy produce, there was one load that came into Canada, and if it's that kind of volume, well, I think we can live with it. But if we're talking about much more than that, well, then we'll have misgivings. And that's why we're reaching out to the government and say, let's follow up on this. And if Ukraine does end up importing more products into Canada, we need to be able to turn on a dime if there is a need to do so. The chicken farmers said that it might be wings, a niche product, and it doesn't take much in terms of chicken wing volume to upset the Canadian domestic market. Do you agree with that? Well, yes, it depends on the type of product. If it has a high value added, if it's highly processed, if it's a deboned product, for example, so it depends not only on the volume, but the type of produce that comes into Canada. And as Mr. McFarlane mentioned to your colleague, the whole supply management system is a well-oiled system. We need predictability when it comes to imports into the domestic market, and imports shouldn't exceed what was slated. Otherwise, it will upset our market, and we want to avoid that. We want to ensure that consumers are protected. Mr. Drouin referred earlier to inflation on poultry, and it's perhaps had less of an effect on other products, but we want to continue to produce our products in sufficient quantities in the Canadian marketplace. Now, if there is excess imports, that might upset our marketplace. So as you're saying that if it's in excess of the predictions, it might upset our marketplace here. But since, for the time being, the volumes don't seem to be too large, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Well, as soon as we start to see things play out, we'll get a better sense of this. This won't necessarily fix the problem, but it'll give us some level of predictability, and we'll be able to speak with officials. The officials on Monday seem to be open to have a closer dialogue with us in the upcoming weeks and months. Well, we hope that is the case. I'll ask you one more question, and anyone can throw in their 2 cents worth. Now, you said that the supply management system was well-oiled, and we're kind of creating a precedent here. You just said that yourself. Should we fear dumping, unfair practices like that? Is that on the horizon?
For an example, so we know, for example, Ovostar has a company in Latvia, processing company, and so could eggs or egg products come in from other countries, be kind of routed through the company? There's a risk, and we don't know what that is. We have a saying in our industry: an egg pushes an egg. If eggs are coming in from other countries, then that means that we don't have a home for the eggs that we're producing. It's as simple as that. And with a longer cycle of laying hens, it takes but from the time we start issuing new quota before we see all of those birds in production, it's 18 months. You can't pivot on a dime when it comes to unlimited, unknown quantities of egg or egg product coming into the country. It's simply going to upend the orderly marketing system that we presently have.
A second.
Yeah.
50 seconds? 40 seconds. Okay. Well, as an egg producer, and it was never guaranteed that there would be follow-up on this, or there would be traceability or anti-dumping measures. You've been offered no guarantees in terms of all of what I just said?
Yeah, we haven't been consulted, so I guess I would say there's been no guarantees. We don't know what the protocols or the surveillance system would be at all regarding eggs.
Well, sometimes, even though there's no consultation, well, you're contacted after the fact, but it's my understanding that hasn't been done either.
No, it hasn't.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Pellicero. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Tremblay.
Thank you, Mr. Tremblay. Ms. Collins, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony. I'm going to start maybe following up on Mr. Longfield's questions around other ways to support Ukraine. I was really interested in some of the examples you gave. And I was wondering in particular with technical assistance to rebuild the agricultural sector in Ukraine, is there opportunities for Canadian organizations and the Canadian government to support in that way?
You know, I think there's always ways that we can support under those endeavors, right? As far as the technology that we have here in North America with the practices that we have in our barns. I mean, the Ukrainians aren't you know, a developing nation. They have a lot of good technology, too, to produce product. But after a war, they're going to have to rebuild. And so when that rebuilding starts again, you know, the best way I think that we can support them is, you know, dollars probably to help rebuild their barns, rebuild their facilities, buy the technology to bring their agriculture business back to that world-class level that, you know, that would allow them to become a trading partner and meet the trading requirements under WTO. So that's kind of my comments. I'm not sure.
Thank you. And we heard from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress really that economic support is one of the key ways. This seems like one lever to give economic support, but really it seems like there could be many others. And when it comes to consultation, it sounds like neither the Canadian Poultry and Egg Processors Council nor the Egg Farmers of Canada, and we heard in our last panel, the Chicken Farmers of Canada were also not consulted. Curious, maybe Ms. Coolin, were you consulted as an expert, an agricultural lawyer, or do you have a sense of kind of the expectations around consultation when it comes to these?
Not with respect to the TRQ, like a goods remission order. That wouldn't be something that we would normally be contacted about.
Okay. Thank you. And then when it comes to food safety, and excuse my ignorance, but just curious specifically around the Egg Farmers of Canada, what would be the impact around some of the food safety concerns that you've talked about on egg farmers in Canada, but also just maybe on the Canadian public if eggs are coming in?
So we have different levels of food safety standards, and around the world, right? And even our counterparts to the U.S. If they're going to bring product into Canada, they meet our standards. So salmonella testing is one of them. We test salmonella in our barns, in our environments. They test eggs. If you're going to test in eggs, you're hardly ever going to find salmonella, but you will find it in a barn. And then so there's practices that we take in place. We want to make sure that the product that the consumers are getting is safe, right? Canadian consumers have a high regard for Canadian farmers, be it chicken, turkey, eggs, dairy, any type of grain that's produced or whatever. And to lose the confidence of Canadian products, if there's that could be jeopardized, is what we're concerned about, right? And then we would lose markets. People would go away from eating that product. Just take a look at Time News and what they did regarding cholesterol, right? It affected our market quite greatly. So it could have the same effect ultimately.
And we heard in the last panel kind of just about the length of the potential impact of the order. It ends on June 9th, 2023, but frozen goods could last longer. But really what you're saying is that the impact could be even longer if something happens and people lose confidence. Ms. Coolin, I found your opening remarks really insightful and enlightening to me as kind of a newcomer to this topic. And when the CFIA is making decisions, do you have a sense of kind of, you spoke a little bit about how they look at food safety concerns, but in your opinion, looking at this case, Do you have a sense of kind of where they would go with the decision? Can you speculate?
It's really hard to speculate just without having kind of any access to the results of the audit that they conducted. And I think also, the concern being raised here is that despite what they may have seen on the audit and having found the system to meet our requirements at that point in time, there's just this question lingering about whether the Ukraine is in a position to still meet those requirements under the current circumstances.
And how would they make a decision based on... My watch does that too. And so how would they now, with this new context of a war where potentially, there are electrical outages, water shortages, et cetera, sanitation issues, like how would they get that new information?
So there is, generally speaking, there's an obligation or an understanding between the parties that if there is any situation that has arisen that would impact the foreign country's food safety system, that they would share that information with CFIA.
And do we know if the Ukraine has shared information?
I believe on Monday CFIA testified that they've had conversations with Ukraine.
Okay, great. And Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
Unfortunately, I have 10 seconds. So if
Okay,
you'd like
I will
to
leave it. Thank
cede
you.
that would be wonderful.
Yes.
We'll now turn to Mr. Nader for up to 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, it's great to be here, and I will admit at the beginning that there are not the most egg farmers in the country in Perth Wellington. That distinction lies with Ms. Rude, who has the most egg farmers in the country. But I was informed by Tanya Haverkamp, who is my board rep in Perth County, that Perth County produces approximately 14 million dozen eggs each year. So we're very proud of that, and that would equate to about 28 million liters of the Nader family eggnog recipe. So we're very proud of that. But on a more serious matter, I want to start off talking a little bit about, and I'll direct these to the Egg Farmers of Canada to begin with, trade issues and CUSMA. We understand that there will be a joint review of CUSMA in the years to come. And I want to know if you have any concerns about what type of precedent a situation like this sets for whether it's the United States or other trading partners when you see a situation like this where supply management appears to be opened up. So whether you have concerns on that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point to raise. It is a concern because it's. I think I saw a statement that the risk of it being carried on is low. Well, low and zero are not the same things, and so anytime you have supply management opened up in that way, there is always the risk that it will carry on, continue on in some other form. And go back, and it's been made by a number of people around this. We have our three pillars, and knowing what's coming into the country is absolutely critical to be able to predict production. And if it's coming in and we have birds in the barn, then those birds are going out of the barn, and that income will be lost to Canadian farmers. And as we come out of COVID, rebuild our supply chains, we believe there's got to be other ways to get at this. And to repeat something we've said, we absolutely want to be part of finding some other way other than this way.
And we spoke a little earlier in response to some questions about the compensation programs that have been announced recently in response to former trade deals. Curious if you have any insight from egg farmers across the country, if they're encountering any challenges in accessing that program currently.
So on those mitigation packages and the compensation with CPTPP and the CUSMA, our farmers are happy with what has been happening. Yeah, it's taken a little longer to process some of it, but we understand delays with COVID. But the government did hold true on their promise. They did work with us. There was really good consultation in those times regarding the amount of volumes and the impact on our industries. So we were thankful for that. So we're a little surprised when this kind of rolled out. And we don't know what the impacts will be regarding, future trade deals, review of CUSMA. The government of the day might be different than the government there today. When CUSMA was negotiated, it was a different president than they have now. And that was a different round of negotiations. I remember going down there, and it was quite dynamic. So as we move forward, it'd be good to know what we're dealing with. Import control is one of our major pillars, and we need to make sure that we respect that pillar.
And I think I have time for at least one last question. I want to follow up a little bit about the concern of avian influenza. We heard from the chicken farmers earlier about the protocols in place when there is an outbreak in a farm in Canada. Want to know if it's a similar protocol for egg farmers, as well as if you can give us an estimate of the timeline of how long it would take to repopulate a farm once it's been completely euthanized after that point.
Yeah, so if you were to be identified to have an AI in your farm, the farmer would find it first, obviously, with the mortality that's hitting. It is quite devastating. Once the order is given, then the farm is euthanized, all the hens on the farm depopulated, complete clean and disinfection. And then for an egg farmer, you'd probably be anywhere from a year to 18 months before you're back in production, because we keep our hens in a laying cycle of 12 months roughly. And so, your replacement pullets that would come into the barn, time to clean up. So it is quite a huge amount of time. There is also a model that the government has regarding being impacted by it. Does it make you rich? No. It might make you whole. But there is a lot of mental stress on the farmers and the family. It is quite devastating when something like that does happen. And it is hitting the U.S. quite hard also. I know in France and in the U.K. they've mandated all poultry to stay indoors. So it's a little concerning when we hear that they're not having any in the U.K. It's like, if you don't look for it, you won't find it.
Mr. Pellicero, thank you. Mr. Mader. Right now, we'll go to Ms. Valdez and Mr. Lewis. I believe you guys are splitting your time for the 5 minutes, but we'll start with Ms. Valdez.
Thank you to the witnesses who have joined us. Just a bit of background. As a baker, I've cracked many an egg. And I also managed a restaurant where we specialize in fried chicken. So I just want to acknowledge that, your concerns to protect Canadians I totally understand, as well as protecting our local farmers. So when we had the opportunity to speak with CFIA, I explicitly asked for the process pre and post import to Canada. So there will be a process before it even enters Canada, there is a review process. And then once the shipment comes into Canada, they will investigate the first 10 shipments, and that would provide the opportunity for them to detect if there is any avian influenza or what have you. And then that would separate the process so that there wouldn't be any cross-contamination for it to ever get into anyone's farms. And I also spoke to Canada Border Services Agency, and they also indicated that they regularly monitor and track imports as well. So there is a tracking mechanism, there is surveillance, and I think you were asking about predictability. So these are the things that I had asked for clarity on, so I just wanted to share that with you. And if you can share your thoughts, I'd appreciate that.
Well, first of all, I listened to the meeting on Monday, and I thank you for asking those questions from our CFIA officials. I'll just add to say, CFIA plays our top priority as an industry is to ensure safe food for Canadians, right? And if you walk through any processing plant in Canada, you see that throughout the operations. It's priority number one, and CFIA plays a critical role in ensuring safe food for Canadians as well, because they do control that import part of the industry. They also have continuous presence in our primary processing establishments and provide oversight for the large majority of our establishments that are federally regulated. And so it's critical for us that CFIA, you mentioned the work that they do when shipments come in. It's very important that they continue, we basically apply the same standards and the same threshold to all the imports coming from, regardless of the source of import. And that's why it's important to us that CFIA continues to do the work that they've been doing to make sure that, again, Canadians have trust in their food sources, regardless of whether those food products are imported or produced domestically.
Thank you. Appreciate the time, and I appreciate everyone here, the witnesses, and Monday's testimony as well. Maybe, I would like to say ultimately, we all want to support Ukraine, and I think that's something that needs to be said over and over again, and that's admirable in their time of need, and Canadians are stepping up in various ways. And we want to also make sure that economic input, the economic impact on supply management sector is minimal, and then while protecting our farmers. And at the same time now we're talking about protecting our food. And so maybe I could turn to Ms. Coughlin and in the same line of questioning. If the Safe Food for Canadians regulations were met, the Health for Animal regulations were met, additional assurances from Ukraine, full inspection for the first 10 shipments, and I believe there were 3 companies involved, so that's about 30 inspections. And then after that, 1 in 10 shipments would get inspected. You mentioned that the systems in place met the CFI requirements. It sounds, to me, it sounds thorough, but you're the expert. So do those measures seem adequate to you?
Comment on the adequacy of them as situations arise. CFIA is following their usual process. They're following, they're implementing their obligations under the SFCR and following, kind of looking at the different factors that are there. Whether or not that will be adequate to ensure that products that ultimately arrive in Canada is difficult to predict.
To give you a chance, maybe I turn to the egg farmers in about a minute left. Are you aware if any eggs from Ukraine are being exported to the EU and the UK?
Ovostar, the large Ukrainian company, is very much one of the largest exporters in Europe. So they're located in central Ukraine, so their headquarters is in Kyiv, and so they have their production facilities around, and they export massive amounts of egg and egg product throughout.
And then last question would be, if the eggs that might come here, would they be tabled eggs, processed eggs? Do you have any idea?
Well, again, we don't know. It's far less likely it would be table eggs, the logistics of transporting eggs in the shell, but I don't know per se. It's more than likely to be egg and egg product. It still creates the same situation where it would directly economically impact our family farms. Just simply a fact.
Thank you, gentlemen. Monsieur Tremblay, pour 2 minutes 30 seconds.
Oui, merci. Thank you very much. I won't talk about my own personal recipes with eggs, but I did want to also reiterate that we are in solidarity with Ukraine. That's not the issue. There are other countries that have had tragedies. This is the very first time, however, we're dealing with agri-foods in this manner. Now, Ms. Cutland, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Yes? Yes? Well, you said that you're not sure that these verification methods are going to be adequate. So I kind of feel like asking you, since the last verification took place in 2019 and the height of the crisis is 2021, out of principle, shouldn't there at least be an update? Shouldn't that imply that for that very reason, in and of itself, we should go back and update the verification process?
So certainly this is an unprecedented situation. So we don't have kind of a similar situation that has arisen to look at what CFIA has done in those situations. I can say, we have seen other situations where they've done a maintenance audit and they have gone back to a country to look again at systems or to look at a certain region where there were concerns or questions that remained.
So it would such an update would be justified then?
It would be reasonable under the circumstances, yes.
Thank you. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair? 50 seconds. Well, just in closing, I think that as far as eggs are concerned, you are afraid of dumping, and some companies might try and pass themselves off as Ukrainian. Do you share the same affairs in terms of chicken? Well, when there are products imported from Ukraine, there are rules of origin that have to be upheld, and I know that was addressed by witnesses on Monday. So really, we rely on the CFIA when they conduct verifications of foreign systems abroad. Well, that's part and parcel of their work, that those countries uphold rules of origin. So we really rely on the CFIA, and we hope that they continue to do their excellent work across the entire world. We count on them to ensure that these goods are in line with the proper standards. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Ms. Collins, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe first to Mr. Lambert. It seemed like you wanted to respond to Mr. Louis' question earlier. He had mentioned that there were safety measures in place. They'd be checking the first 10 shipments and then one every 10. Did you have a response?
Well, no, I was just kind of pivoting back to the other point here is in addition to that, we have to contemplate that it would directly impact the whatever comes in, and that's a big part of this. We don't know what will come in. We don't know the volumes. We don't know the frequency. And if it's unlimited, then those products will come in and displace Canadian farm products and impact the family farm in terms of income.
Thank you so much. And it seems like you you have the concern both around food safety for the products being imported for Canadian health and safety, but then also if it is chicken, the avian flu coming in and potentially impacting your farms and kind of viability. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, we can't really speak to the chicken side of it, certainly to the egg side of it. So I don't know if Jean-Michel wants to add anything to that, but yeah, it would be a concern.
The concern that the avian flu would be brought into Canada from Ukraine, is that
just the concern that it would not only impact poultry and chicken farmers, but that egg farmers might be impacted. I'm just trying to get clear on the full impacts of some of the food safety pieces.
So we're always concerned when there's an AI outbreak, right? And in Canada, there's restrictive zones that are put up in place, and there's restrictive zones that you can't travel through. So, are these trucks that are transporting the product to be shipped to the port traveling through those zones? So then that product could get contaminated with the flu, and the flu could get on the boat and then brought over to here. We know that this flu is one of the most vigilant that can live for a period up to 270 days in the right environment. And we also know that it can be carried by a fly for up to over a mile. And if that fly lands on a piece of equipment in the barn, and then that virus starts to thrive again, then the barn can be infected. So it's highly, highly spreadable. So it's a big concern.
Thanks for the context. Mr. Chair, how long do I have?
0 seconds.
Thanks.
In fact, just without hopefully drawing the ire of my colleagues, just Ms. Coughlin, you're a witness after my own heart as a lawyer, and you did a very good job. I've formerly worked at McGuinness Cooper. You did a great job at lining out the regulatory elements. Just a couple quick questions. If you're familiar, what is the regulatory environment in the European Union or in the United Kingdom similar to what we would have in terms of those protocols that you laid out in terms of food safety? Do you know much about the other regulatory models or no?
Unfortunately not. I know certain of the countries in the European Union have been recognized by CFIA as countries from which we can import meat products, but I really can't speak to it further than that.
Okay, and you don't have any information in relation to how those regulatory agencies might have responded? I mean, you certainly laid out the case for what CFIA has to demonstrate under its own regulatory model, because I think there's two really principles here. There's one about the market access, which has been outlined today, but then there's also about the food safety, and I think that there's something this committee can draw upon, which is any lessons that we're learning from other jurisdictions about the importation of product and the concerns that might be levied in those jurisdictions. So maybe that's something we can ask the analyst to follow up with. Thank you to all our witnesses for your testimony here today. Colleagues, that ends our session. A reminder tomorrow that at 11 a.m. we have an informal meeting. There's actually a delegation from Mongolia who is going to be here. There are 4 members of parliament from the Mongolian equivalency and their agriculture committee. We do have translation. It will not be a televised meeting, but I encourage anyone that can make it. It'll be for an hour, and I think it'll be a great exchange. So please join us if you can. Thank you to our witnesses. Everyone enjoy your evening. Take care.